What's up, gangsters? It is time for episode 4 of the great bare metal adventure and the F86. This segment is going to get me all the way through to spraying all of the samples from this bandance row of metallic paints that I have right here in front of me. And I think there's some pretty interesting results, and it's, as usual, long, so let's get right into it. Okay, so this is something you never want to see, especially as the first clip in a video segment, but this is the wing section sitting in a tub of brake fluid, and there's some interesting things here. Last night, after I kind of, stepped away and had the chance to get a little clarity on things, I realized that I probably knew the answer to what happened on this wing all along, because I used the same towel in the same spot on the towel to wipe off this wing as I did to wipe off the smear of Panzer putty. So it kind of makes sense. And if you look at these striation type things that I was talking about yesterday, that kind of bears that out, because they very much now look like the sort of swirl marks that you get when you wipe a fluid across a clean surface and it leaves, like water spots or that type of thing. So anyway, I think I understand the issue. I don't see any reason why it would have been the wipe down with Mr. Leveling Thinner, because I've done that before. I mean, I basically want to use the strongest solvent that I've got that's safe to make sure I cut through any kind of finger oils or anything like that after, handling a part so much. So I don't think that's a problem, but I am getting all of my paint mule pieces cut off of their sprues, and I'm going to do a control where I wipe one of them down with Mr. Leveling Thinner and one of them I do not, and, see if there's a difference. The previous samples that I shot with GX2 did not get the wipe down. So who knows? I mean, I may learn something new about that. But at any rate, I have to say about brake fluid as a stripper, look, I'm a convert, okay? I'm the one that always says that my only loyalty is to results. And I have said some hateful things about using brake fluid as a paint stripper, because it just never made sense to me when there were other options. I mean, it's oily, and why would you want that anywhere near something that's going to be repainted? But the fact is that it is possible to wash all of it off with dish soap afterwards, and it works faster than IPA in my experience so far. This has been in here for about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours now, and it's already pretty close to done. So hey, a good solution is a good solution. Okay, so here we go. You can see that there has been much painting going on here. I've got all of my test pieces sprayed with a fairly nice glossy coat of GX2. And I say fairly nice because it's not perfect, and I'll show you that up close and talk about what I think I've learned at this point. I posted pictures of this batch of parts, and the responses were interesting, because I also made the comment that all of this plus a 1/48 F86 is what you can expect to cover with one bottle of GX2 thinned 50/50 with Mr. Leveling Thinner. This is almost empty. And a couple of guys were like, man, I can't believe that's all you got. And then I had a couple of people who were like, well, wouldn't it really be better if you just misted it on instead of laying it on so wet. And so I'm going to talk about that because the answer is no. And I think that part of it is that just dudes are conditioned to operate the way that flat paints work, because that's what most of us use most of the time, since most of us are military model makers. And flat paints are super forgiving, and you can lay them on misty or heavy, and you get about the same result either way. And so you can spray very lightly and in very thin layers and conserve paint and get a lot of mileage. But gloss stuff is just not the same deal. And there's the fundamental thing with gloss is that in order for it to do its thing and turn and give you that really slick, wet look, all those little paint droplets have to be able to settle down and then flatten out and flow together. They have to be able to self-level on a very, very small scale, in other words. And there's a couple of things that affect that. Obviously, the formulation of the paint itself being the main thing. If the paint starts to set up too quickly, then there's not time for that to take place. And that's why you have to spray wet, because everything's got to stay fluid enough to flow together and level out before it can't move anymore. And that's one of the problems with trying to get this really glossy finish with a lacquer, is that it starts to set up so fast. So the wetter you spray, the longer it takes, the better off you will be in the long run. The other thing is how much traction the paint gets on the substrate. If it's a rough surface, even microscopically, the paint's not going to flow out as well. And that's the main reason why I chose not to prime on this project, because I knew that with a primer, giving the paint more traction, that it was going to affect its ability to level out. And I showed that in the last segment, where I tried to salvage the disaster with the wing by priming the bottom surface before I sprayed on the GX2. And you could see in that very clearly that even though I sprayed the GX2 the very same way that I did everywhere else, that the result was not nearly as glossy. So I think that validates that point. So the thing is just understand when you go into this that you have to paint much wetter than you're probably used to or maybe comfortable with. But it's not a big deal, because this stuff also shrinks down a lot. All of this stuff here has basically one light tack layer and one heavy wet coat on it. And you'll see when we look at it up close that the level of detail, it really hasn't been affected much, if any. Certainly not any worse than having a layer of primer and a couple of layers of a flat paint on there. So I realize it's different and it's a little bit scary to paint that way, but it really is the way that you have to do it if you want to get this sort of finish. And the same thing applies to using a gloss clear if you're trying to clear coat to a level that will give you an automotive type gloss. Anyway, that's the deal. I mean, if you missed it on, you're going to have a problem, and I will show you that in detail here in a second, because there is an area of this where I kind of ended up doing that, not by choice, but it just sort of turned out that way, and I'll explain why. But first of all, there were a couple of different variables with all of these pieces. This one, I wanted to test whether or not the wipe down with Tamiya lacquer thinner created a problem. And this is the wing piece that was wiped down. None of the rest of them were. Now, when I sprayed this, looking at it, from my normal distance with just my reading glasses on, As soon as I started spraying it, I immediately thought, uh-oh, it caused a problem. But when I put my Optivisor on and get a real close look at it, because you can see maybe from there that there's some goobers right here in this area. When you zoom in, though, and you look at it really close, it's easy to see what the culprit is. Those are fibers from the rag that I used to wipe it off. So I probably should have used a tack cloth, and under normal circumstances I would have. There's, those little hairs are all over the place right there. And that obviously ruins what is otherwise a very nice finish. Now, so anyway, my conclusion from that is, as I thought, wiping it down with Tamiya lacquer thinner is not an issue. Now, the next variable was that I switched my Iwata HPTH over to the fan tip because I thought, well, I'll get a much wider spray pattern. And so I did that, you can see. And at about 20 PSI, I've got a compressor with a 1-gallon tank, and it can actually keep up fairly well. You may not know this, but a fan tip requires more cubic feet per minute of airflow than a regular spray tip does. And with my little compressor, if I'm up at like 30 or 35 PSI, it can't keep up if I'm spraying continuously. But anyway, that gives me a spray pattern that is about half of this wing wide. It's a nice solid inch wide spray pattern with a nice tight edge to it. And so whereas with the regular tip on that airbrush, I would make at least a half a dozen passes across this thing to get it covered. And I was able to do it in 2, maybe 3 with the fan tip. And you can see that's a pretty dang good result for right out of the airbrush. I mean, that's about as good as I got on that B25 tailpiece. That was my original sample. When you zoom in really close, you can see that it's not a perfectly glassy surface. There is some very small scale orange peel. That's just part of the deal with gloss. So I'm overall pretty pleased with that. This piece here, this entire piece, they were all done with the fan tip. Now, again, that is 2 layers. One thing I'm starting to conclude is that it takes 3, and here's part of the reason that I believe that. This result, when I look at it through my Optivisor, is really good, but not quite as good as some parts of the F-86 fuselage. And in particular, this vertical stabilizer. If you look at that, it is a slightly better result. It may not show up on the camera, but under magnification, it is a slightly better result than what I got here. And this was done with the regular tip. But what happened here is that I had done 2 layers. I looked at this and sort of forgetting that this doesn't really need to be that perfect because it's going to get painted in white as an underlay for the decals, I hit it again with a nice wet layer. And so this has 3, maybe even 4 layers of the gloss black on it. And it is the best portion of this entire surface. And you can see in places, even on this one, where like I switched direction to get the front sort of part of the leading edge here, that there are places where it's a little bit more pebbly because of overspray and not having a perfectly wet edge. So look, I mean, the ideal thing would be, and this is why a spray can sometimes works better, is if you had a spray pattern that would cover this entire thing in one shot. And that's where a spray gun like an RG3 also would come in handy. I mean, it doesn't help you with something like a fuselage because what you really need is a spray gun that's shaped like an O and you can just basically pass it over your fuselage and spray from 360 degrees at once. But anyway, we have the limitations that we have. The bottom line is that the fewer edges you have and fewer direction changes you have to make, the better off you are. And so that also dictates sort of your painting strategy. Obviously, if you can paint a piece like this going all in this direction, you're better off than if you have to come back and make multiple passes going this way, because again, you have more edges to deal with. Now, the second variable is I wanted to try my Paschke H, because it's pretty trustworthy for laying down gloss. And as you can see, I've got the mid-sized tip in there. And the first couple of parts I sprayed with it, I had that thing open, I had it wide open. And I sprayed these 3 pieces right here with that. And I had forgotten that you can't really spray with the H that opened all the way like that, because it kind of sputters a little bit. It doesn't atomize as well. But even as poorly as the paint went down, it still produced a relatively good result, because it was so wet that it had time to level out. Now, what you can see here is that on these pieces of Academy plastic, clearly something was there as a contaminant, because all around these rivets right here, and I think there may be one other place where you can kind of see that, I've got some fish eyes. And that is what fish eyes look like right there. Who knows? But that's why a wipe down is always a good idea, is just in case there is some little bit of surface contaminant. Again, as I've said before, mold release really should not be an issue. And most of the time, a little surface contaminant, like you saw in this other piece, is not a problem. But gloss lacquer is way more unforgiving. Any little thing is going to cause a problem. And so, it's good. This is one case where I would say, look, if you're going to wash your parts in the sink with soapy water, this is one time to do it. For me, wiping it down with a solvent like IPA or Mr. Leveling thinner, Tamiya lacquer thinner, whatever, is just as good, as long as you get rid of all the little hairs from your towel. So, at any rate, these pieces didn't come out too bad. They're not great, so what I'll probably use them for in the test is the metallic paints that don't require the super glossy finish. On realizing that I had the airbrush opened up too much, I turned it down to about 1 turn below wide open and sprayed the rest of the parts. And they all turned out really pretty good. Maybe not quite as good as the ones I did with the fan tip, but still pretty good. I mean, when you get in there close, you can see that there is some orange peel. So not great. But again, a lot of it is in how wet it gets sprayed. These pieces, for whatever reason, I sprayed a little bit wetter, and they are a little bit better. Still not as good as the fan tip parts. I think another really wet layer on these probably would have done the trick. But you can see this is still, even like this is still better than what I was able to get with either Tamiya Gloss Black Lacquer X1 or the Mr. Paint Super Gloss Black. No contest. Now, back to what I was talking about before about misting versus spraying it wet. These pieces right here I sprayed with the fan tip, and they were really, really nice. But then when I sprayed these pieces, I had a little bit of overspray. And they went soft. And when I talk about a hard or a soft gloss, what I'm talking about is the quality of the edges of the reflection. A really hard gloss is basically going to have a perfect mirror-like reflection. I mean, like look at the surface of my phone. When you look at the reflection of the diffuser on my work light, that's perfect, even with all these fingerprints on there. That's a hard gloss. That's a hard reflection. When you look at the reflections in this piece, especially when you get up close, you can see that there's some fuzziness to it. And that's caused by surface texture as well as, curvature, but it's mostly about surface texture. So what I did is when I saw that I had a kind of a softness on some of these pieces, I said, well, I want to fix that, so I'll just respray them with the Paschke. And so I did that. But I had a little bit of overspray in a couple of spots, and I decided to leave this one to just show you the difference, okay? You see that? How it's on almost flat paint over on the right-hand side as opposed to being glossy on the left-hand side. That's because this overspray area right here is basically what happens when you are misting a paint on and spraying it very light and dry. And that just shows you right there why you can't do that with a gloss paint if you want that kind of a result. So there you go. With all of that, these test pieces are ready to go. And I am going to get busy spraying silver paint here pretty directly. I should take a quick second to also show you this wing all stripped off and washed in soap and water to get rid of any brake fluid residue, and this hopefully will be ready to blow a new layer of nice and shiny gloss black on when I get some. I don't have enough to try it right now, and I don't have to be in a hurry because nothing more has to happen with that part until I've decided, what the best metallic is going to be, and I get into all of that. So, with all that said, onwards and hopefully upwards. One thing that I forgot to mention is that I got some of this stuff. And I want to try it because this may help solve the problem of the GX2 being a lacquer and starting to set up so quickly. But I have no idea how to use this stuff, and I am completely unable to read the instructions, assuming there even are any instructions on here. So once I can get somebody who knows Japanese to help me read this, maybe I'll figure out how to use it, and maybe I'll try it out. But didn't really want to make it part of this test until I had some idea of what to do with it. Okay, so everything gets tested. Given that I've got some repairs to make in a couple of spots on the fuselage, I thought, well, the fact that this little wing piece has hairs all over it would be a good opportunity to sort of practice sanding this stuff out and see how well it takes another coat of the GX2 on top of it. So I rubbed this out with a piece of 1500 grit, wet or dry, and using it really wet. And then I used a couple of Abralon pads on it. I think this is a 2000 grit Abralon pad. Again, used really wet. And this stuff responds really well to sandpaper. You can see that that's a nice, clean, smooth surface. Now, that is going to provide some traction for the paint. And so it'll be interesting to see once again if I'm able to get the same level of gloss when I reshoot it as I was going on to just the bare plastic. So let's take a look at this wing that I sanded and then repainted. I think you will have to agree That is pretty fucking sexy right there. Now you can see, especially when you look right there in the middle, there is a little bit of orange peel. But as I've said over and over again, that's just part of the package with gloss. Don't believe me? Walk outside right now and look at your car that was spray painted by robots, where everything was optimized to deliver the paint perfectly. So you can't, you can't be unhappy about that level of orange peel. I mean, I would get that if I sprayed 2K U-Pol. That's what it would look like straight out of the spray gun. So again, not a whole lot to complain about there. This GX2 is just wonderful stuff. Now, you will see, I'm sure, that I have started to lose a little bit of the panel line detail. But this has got what's probably equal now to, like, I don't know, four layers of paint on it, because I did lay this layer down really wet. But this gives me confidence that I can repair the areas that are unsatisfactory on the fuselage and still come out pretty well. So, good stuff, man. You gotta like that. Except for the reflection of my stupid face. That part we'll try to ignore. Okay, so now we are getting into the meat of this whole project, at least as far as I'm concerned. And that is where I have now sprayed a sample of each one of the metallics that I want to test out. But before I get into showing you the results, I want to just spend a little time talking about chrome and aluminum, because this is kind of one of those pet peeves in the model making world for me. Lots of guys talk about chrome and whether or not the chrome that we get on kit parts in particular is realistic. And so I want to address that, as well as kind of talk about why I get frustrated with the ability of these metallic paints to replicate things like chrome and polished aluminum, and why they just generally fail so miserably. But yet why I think a lot of the model making world has sort of been conditioned to believe that they're actually a good substitute. So, but to kind of go through that, I think it's just a good idea to sort of look at some real finishes and talk about how they happen. And the first thing is this. Okay, this is chrome. All right. Specifically, this is there's different names for it, and there's different processes for how it happens. But some people call it bright nickel, triple chrome plating. There's different names. But basically what happens is they lay down a layer of copper, and then they lay down a layer of nickel, and then they lay down a layer of chromium. And you get a very hard, durable, bright, decorative finish. And that's all done via electroplating. And you can see, I mean, look, that's chrome, okay? It's chrome whether you look at it from here or whether you look at it from here. And so that kind of gets into the whole absurdity of the idea of scale chrome, and I'll address that more in a second. But that's real chrome, okay? Now, this is an example of something that's kind of like chrome, but not exactly. This is what's called electroless nickel. And it's a nickel plate that happens in a chemical bath rather than an electroplate tank. And you can see the difference that it's kind of got a slightly more yellow tone to it. The reason they do electroless nickel is because it's cheap and it's really durable, so it's good for things like tools because it doesn't have to look quite as pretty, but it does have to last a long time. Now, let's talk about aluminum for a second. All right. This, obviously, the handle of my hobby knife is obviously polished aluminum. Everybody knows that. It's also probably got a coat of clear anodizing on it. And anodizing is basically nothing more than controlled oxidation of aluminum. And if you introduce dyes into it, then you get things that are like red anodized or blue anodized or whatever. Now, here are some other looks at aluminum, and this is just a grip exerciser that I built a few years ago. You can see it's got some springs on it, and the springs are a good example to look at because that is stainless steel. And you can kind of see that it also has this sort of brownish tone to it as compared to aluminum. This lever here is also basically just pure aluminum that's been die cast and then polished. And you can see that it looks a lot like the knife handle that I showed you a second ago. Anyway, these parts right here are examples of machined aluminum that have been clear anodized. And you can kind of see the slight difference in tone and luster. But what I really want you to see is this. Okay, this tubing is what aluminum looks like right out of the mill. This obviously has oxidized over time, but this is basically what it looks like when it comes out of the mill. This is just extruded aluminum tubing. You can see it says 6061 on there. That just means that it's a 6000 series aluminum, which means the major alloying element is silicon. And it's the most, 6061 is the most common industrial aluminum. The T6 just means that it's heat treated to the T6 condition. So this stuff is really good for lots of things. It's got good weldability, great machinability, and it's very common. And you can see that it has kind of this sort of just flat satin look to it. And that's basically what sheet aluminum looks like when it comes out of the rollers. And that obviously is what got used a lot on aircraft. Except that in the case of aircraft aluminum sheeting, they did something to it back in the day. I probably still do, I guess. And that was called all-clad. Now, that may immediately confuse some of you because lots of people simply think of all-clad as being a brand of lacquer paints. Well, they have other kinds of paints as well. Don't get me started on that. But anyway, that's what they're most well known for, are things like all-clad chrome and aluminum finishes. But if you notice, they actually call it all-clad too, because all-clad itself is a trademark of the Alcoa company. And what all-clad was or is was basically a recognition that while aluminum sheet was great for skinning an aircraft, it had some corrosion problems, especially, with salt air and ocean spray and, that sort of thing. And so what they did was they coated it with a very thin layer of pure aluminum. And that's why aircraft skins have the look that they do, and why even, on the factory floor, they weren't totally shiny, but they did have a certain amount of reflectivity to them. And they could also be polished to a real mirror finish. There's plenty of examples on the internet that show kind of both conditions. That fresh off the factory floor is what I'm trying to start with as far as the look on my F86 project, where it's not this super shiny, perfect mirror finish, but it does have a certain amount of reflectivity. And then I want to try and do some weathering on top of that to reflect the scuffing and the oxidation. Now, this is where we get into the chrome plating that we get in model kits. This is kind of hopefully brings all this together. Okay, this is Tamiya chrome, and I really should be using air quotes to call it chrome because it's not really chrome. This is actually aluminum. And you're like, what? How did that happen? Okay, so what happens is this is done with a process called vacuum metalization. And what they basically do is they take aluminum and they boil it. to the point where it turns into a vapor, and then it gets deposited on the surface of this plastic part. And I'm sure you're like, wait a minute, how can that happen? How can you have boiling aluminum deposited on a piece of plastic that melts at 420 degrees Fahrenheit? So the deal is, first of all, it takes place in a vacuum chamber, and so that reduces the melting and vaporization point dramatically. But the thing is, the aluminum source for vacuum metalization is basically a filament that's the size of a human hair. And the heat source that's required to vaporize it is therefore very, very tiny. And so once it becomes vapor, it stays a vapor in that vacuum until it condenses on the surface of whatever's inside the chamber. And that's how you get this very perfect looking mirror finish of pure aluminum on plastic. And so this is really kind of analogous to what happened when they make all-clad sheet. It's just that all-clad sheet doesn't start out quite as smooth and perfect, so you don't get, and I'm not exactly sure how the all-clad process is done, but that's why you don't get the same sort of a mirror finish that's as perfect as this is on a sheet of all-clad aluminum on an aircraft skin. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is, look, this is chrome, real chrome, and this is model kit chrome. People talk about this not being realistic. Really? How can you get much closer to this than you are with this? There's a slight variation in tone because aluminum has a slightly cooler tone than nickel or chromium does, but that's almost a perfect match. People talk about the scale effect. Look, that's just silly, okay? Chrome is chrome no matter what size it is or how close you are to it. What changes the appearance of it, though, is the reflections. If you have a really small model car and it's got chrome bumpers on it, and you've got gigantic reflections, obviously that's not going to look right. So that really comes down to photography. But look, the fact is, it's the same no matter what size it is. Chrome is chrome. What happens, though, that causes a lot of chrome parts to look unrealistic is that the finish is super thick, and so it ends up not having very sharp detail. If you look at this Tamiya part, they've done a really good job because even the texture of that weld that they've created on that pipe hanger bracket shows through the chrome finish. And part of the reason why some chrome, especially on older kits, is so bad is because before they do the vacuum metalization, they spray a layer of clear gloss lacquer on it to give it I guess they did it because they thought it would give it a better surface. And newer chrome kit parts like this don't have as much or as thick of a layer of that lacquer underneath there. They may not have any at all. It just kind of depends. But anyway, that's kind of my rant about the difference between kit chrome and real chrome and why, in my opinion, you should always work with the kit chrome unless you absolutely have no choice. You know, there are situations like this exhaust pipe, for example, where when you go to put the two halves of the pipe together, you're going to have a seam, and that probably is not going to look good at all, and you may not have any choice but to use some type of a chrome pretender paint once you've filled in the seam and taken care of all of your body work. So look, there are situations where you have no choice, and that's part of why I wanted to do this big test, because even though I'm after a nice shiny aluminum finish for my F86, the fact that some of these paints are called chrome and they often get used by model makers to impersonate chrome, it's all kind of the same subject. So anyway, we are now about to take a look at all of the samples that I've painted, and you can kind of judge for yourself how close they come to looking like any of these real chrome and aluminum samples that I've shown you. Okay, so here we go, and I'm not going to go through these in any particular order, but I am going to save what I think is the best for last. So right off the bat, one thing I wanted to try is I had this can of the old school Model Master metalizer. I just had it around, and I just wanted to either get rid of it or find a use for it. But in particular, I was curious because it talks about being a buffing metalizer. So I sprayed some, and that was the sound of that can going in the trash can because it's useless. I mean, look, that's sort of a, this looks kind of like a nice dull milled aluminum, but I don't know what the heck they mean about it being buffable because no amount of rubbing on it turned it into anything any better. I mean, it's, again, it's not bad. It's got a nice look to it, but there are other things that I sprayed that do basically the same job. So anyway, that's more of just a novelty, I guess, and a curiosity thing. Okay, so getting into the various finishes. This is MRP, let's see, where am I at here? No, not MRP. This is Guns Super Silver, C159. And it's not a bad color. I mean, it worked fine. I had to thin it. I thinned it 50-50 with Mr. Leveling Thinner. And it has a nice tone to it. It's got a little bit more of a tone that looks to me a little bit more like stainless steel than it does like aluminum, but, still looks pretty good. The one thing that I thought was weird about it was that when I sprayed it, it was a little, like, spitty coming out of my airbrush. It worked fine. And it creates a kind of a nice satin finish, so not too bad. But I think you could also see, and this will be true with a bunch of these that I'm about to show you, that having a perfect gloss undercoat isn't really necessary because you're going to get a satin or a flat finish out of this stuff no matter what you do. So there's that one. Okay, now the next thing that I sprayed is, well, not the next thing I sprayed, but sort of the next category are all of the MRP metallics. Okay, now this is MRP 8 Duralumin, and you can see that it also kind of has a dark tone to it. What duralumin is, or duraluminium, whatever you want to call it, it's actually duralumin. That's another trademark from Alcoa that was used back in the day. And all that really means is that it's a 2000 series aluminum, which is also often called aircraft aluminum. It's alloyed to be a lot stronger than like a 6000 series. And it does have a slightly different tone to it. This is not really necessarily an accurate representation of that tone, but it's still nice. Looks good. You can still use it to create something that's a little bit between a regular aluminum paint and a dark aluminum paint. It's a little bit flatter than some of the other ones. Okay, so the next thing in the MRP lineup, let's see, is, okay, all of these here are, these four and this one are all MRP. Okay, this one right here is MRP 9 white aluminum, and you can see it has a distinctly neutral and light tone to it, so that's good. This is Matt McDougall's favorite, which is the MRP 81, I think that's right. Let's see. Yeah, MRP 81 anodized aluminum. We've already talked about the silliness of that name for a color, but doesn't matter. You can see it has a slightly yellowish tone to it, and you can definitely see that in the bottle. All of these pretty much have differences when you look at them in the bottle that will kind of give you a clue as to how they're going to turn out. This one right here is the MRP number 3, which is the Super Silver Metallic. And I think this one is probably going to end up being my choice of silver for my 1/32 Hobby Boss Tempest, because I already know that MRP is great and it chips really well, and so I think this is a good representation for RAF high-speed silver. But then again, so is this one. This is MRP 128, which is just called silver, and they say on the label that it is supposed to be similar to C8. It is slightly cooler in tone than the super silver metallic, but you can see, I mean, in a blind taste test, it would be very difficult to tell the difference between those two. They're just really close. So honestly, I don't know which one I'll use. I may use both of them to just sort of represent variations in the tone of the silver paint on that Tempest. Now, that's all of the, well, wait a minute. There is actually one more on here that I didn't talk about yet, and that's this one. This is MRP 31, which is supposed to be chrome. Now, that's about as chrome as I am Brad Pitt. It's nice. It's got a nice kind of shiny look to it, but if you kind of go back to what I was showing you with the real metal samples a second ago, what this looks most like is those stainless steel springs that I showed you. I mean, it's great. It looks nice, but chrome, no, not at all, not even close. Just another shade that you can use to create some variation in your metal panels. So there we go. Again, just to recap these MRP colors. This is MRP chrome. This is MRP super silver metallic. This is MRP anodized aluminum, and this is MRP white aluminum, and this is just plain MRP silver. Now, this sample right here, you may have taken an interest in because I think even on camera you'll be able to see that it has a little bit more brilliance to it than any of these other five. And it does, and I've talked about it before. This is the Zero metallic silver, the ZP 1340. And it has kind of become my favorite when I want to create just a basic aluminum finish. I mean, when you put this polished aluminum knife handle next to it, you can see that it's not a bad representation. This aluminum is real aluminum is a slightly warmer tone, but this has a nice brilliance to it that I think works really good. I used it on the frame of my Repsol Honda MotoGP bike, and I am really pleased with the way that it looks. I don't really know, how to describe it if the subtleties don't come through on camera, but it just has a little more brilliance to it, and I like it. Now, I have had some problems with Zero paints. Some of their primary colors are very, very hot, and if you've watched any of my videos about the Repsol Honda project, you know what sorts of problems that caused me. But this one does not seem to have that problem. I haven't had any issues with it wrinkling the plastic or doing anything weird. It goes down, just super easy. And so, again, my only loyalty is to results. The fact that I've had trouble with other Zero colors, notwithstanding, this, I think, is a really good representation of just plain aluminum. What it looks kind of a lot alike, but that is even more brilliant, and I think I talked about this is the ink from the Molotov chrome pen that I mixed with just clear gloss lacquer. And yeah, this is rough because the underlying surface was really rough. But you can see the difference in brilliance, hopefully, and tone. And when you look at this, again, this polished aluminum pen, man, I mean, this is a really close match. So again, to me, this is kind of compelling. the process of getting the ink out of the pen and combining it with a clear gloss lacquer is kind of a hassle, but this is a really brilliant aluminum finish that even, this has some of that reflectivity that I'm looking for, even as crappy as this surface is. And I mean, you can see that there. This is pretty compelling in terms of creating the type of look that I'm after, because again, it just has more reflectivity even than this zero paint that I like does. So that, again, decisions. And I'm not even going to get into how I'm going to make my decision as to what to use just yet, because there are other things that factor into this. Like what can I do with it after I paint it? Because I am going to want to do some weathering. And I'm going to have to mask and spray some insignia and do some decals. And so what I choose as my final paint for this project is going to depend partly on some of those things. So this right here is kind of a leading contender, even with the issues of having to get it out of the pen and mix it and the expense, because this right here is a nice hard lacquer finish once it's been mixed with that clear gloss lacquer, and that gives me some freedoms that some of these others don't have. And that brings us to the next set of samples. And this is where we get into some of the other chromes. Now, this right here is pretty easily recognizable. This is All-Clad 107 chrome. And this is kind of everybody's favorite, and it's real easy to see why. I mean, the reflectivity on this is fantastic. I mean, it just really does look the part. Unfortunately, the part that it looks is, I keep going back to this, polished aluminum. It is not a good representation of chrome. And just to remind you of why not, let me drag out the chrome sample again, okay? Not chrome. Not chrome at all. It's as close as you're going to get probably in terms of reflectivity, but it's still not chrome. Now, part of the thing with spray and All-Clad 107 is that it does have good reflectivity in its own right, but part of what it does is also an optical illusion. Okay, I sprayed it in several different thicknesses on this part. And over here, it's really thin, and you can kind of see the effect that they want you to achieve when they tell you to just mist it on in super thin layers. What it's kind of doing is giving you that glossiness from the base coat, but also giving you that darkness to kind of replicate those dark reflections that you see sometimes in a chrome surface. But to me, it doesn't look like those reflections. It just looks like a sort of blotchy airbrushing. And so I don't, the optical illusion doesn't really work on me. Now, you can, however, use it, if you do it in a controlled fashion, to replicate some of the scuffing and just differences in patina that you get on a polished aluminum surface as soon as people start touching it and scratching it and rubbing on it. Now, speaking of that, okay, that is the major problem with All-Clad chrome. Okay, I'm just going to show you right here on camera, okay? That's just my plain old thumb, maybe a little bit sweaty, and I just rubbed that paint right off of there, no problem at all. Now, let's see how easily it rubs off on some of these other areas where I painted it a little bit more heavily. I already know the answer. It's just a matter of how hard you rub and how much you continue to rub. It's not terrible, doesn't come off as easily, but it is definitely not a finish that you can leave to its own devices. It has to have some kind of a protective coat on it, and it has to be a water-based varnish, because any kind of lacquer, especially, is going to immediately just turn this into silver paint. I mean, you can watch it happen before your very eyes. Ask me how I know. Learned the hard way. So that's just one of the disadvantages. You're going to get this, beautiful replication of chrome. And I think that this over here in particular, where I went ahead and just laid it on a little more thickly, is just as good as what I got out of the Molotov pen at considerably less cost and hassle. So I think if it came down to getting this type of finish and I have to make a choice between those two things, All Clad wins. But there is another contestant. And this was kind of my holy shit moment this morning. But first of all, let's take a look at this. This is the Mr. Hobby Super Metallic Chrome Silver that I had heard lots of good things about. Yeah, okay, whatever. Again, that's not chrome. I mean, hey, great, nice looking sort of raw aluminum, and I'll use it up for that purpose, and I didn't have to thin it, so that was nice. This stuff came out of the bottle ready to spray, so that was cool. But yeah, not chrome. This, on the other hand, was unexpected. I did not think that this paint was going to produce this type of result. And this is the AK-477 Chrome Enamel. And even if it did not say enamel on the side of the bottle, hello All Clad, are you paying attention? This is good labeling. But as soon as you open this, you get the smell of diesel. You know 100% that it is an enamel. But wow, I mean, look at that. That is a sexy chrome finish. And I've never sprayed this stuff before, so I did a little bit of playing with it here to just kind of learn. The reflectivity happens immediately as soon as you start building it up. And so you can do sort of the same thing that you do with the All Clad, where you use the opacity to create, that sort of variation. And I did that here on this panel where I wrote the part number, and you can maybe see that a little bit. I also figured out that if you just hose it on too wet, that even when it dries, you'll get some surface defects, and you can kind of see that here on this aileron area. Might be something you could do on purpose, sort of, give you a little bit of weird variation there that happens when aluminum naturally oxidizes. Up here on the front, I sprayed it in different ways, and you can see this is 3 layers right here. This one little panel right here is 4, and that's kind of where I felt like it started to reach the tipping point. You can kind of see how the hardness of the reflection changes as you cross that panel line into that one little section. So I kind of feel like 3 layers is sort of the magic number for this stuff. Now, the question is, how durable is it? Not super durable. You can see right here where I rubbed it off with my finger. And it took a little bit more effort than the All Clad did. But you can see the damage I'm doing by rubbing it with my thumb. Now, the question is it always going to be like that, or is this happening because it's an enamel that hasn't had sufficient time to fully harden yet? And only time will tell. So over the next week or so, hopefully not much, I'm not going to allow any more than that, because I have to move on with the project if I want to finish within the 45 days, right? We'll see whether or not this hardens up. Either way, if it does harden up, that's great. Maybe it doesn't require a clear coat from the standpoint of durability. I mean, look at that. Look at how nicely that matches that polished aluminum. That's good. Really an impressive result. But even if it does harden up to where it's touchable, it's an enamel, and that totally throws into question how to weather it and do things like panel line washes, because obviously an enamel panel line wash like Tamiya or Ammo is not going to work. Going to totally screw it up. So how do we deal with that? I suspect that the only answer is going to be, again, a water-based clear varnish. So, it kind of is what it is. I think that the one really hard conclusion from all of this is that if you want this level of reflectivity out of your polished aluminum surface, you are going to have to put down some kind of a protective coat. There's just no way around it. So I still haven't made a decision as to what I'm going to use for the F86, but I think you can see there's lots to think about. Okay, so there you go. That's where I'm at with it, and hopefully you agree that there is some pretty compelling stuff there. But before I close it out, I want to mention something that I keep forgetting to point out. One of our members of Scale Modelers Critique Group who's been following this knows way more about F86s than I ever will. And he has pointed out that that there's a scoop on the side of the fuselage. You should be able to see it right about there. Hopefully the camera will, come on, focus on that. Anyway, maybe you can see it. There it is. My finger was on top of it. Right there next to my finger. Anyhow, that scoop is only there on aircraft from Block 40 or newer. And at that, maybe only on aircraft that were in service in the Japanese Defense Force. There is a picture of one at the U.S. Air Force Museum at Wright-Patt that has the scoop, but it's obviously a later F model and is also a little bit of a one-off because it's got it's fitted with some camera blisters, I think. Anyway, all of that, not to get too bogged down in those details. Point is that for pretty much any version that you're building with this kit, if you're really disturbed by such things, you should remove the scoop if you want real accuracy. I didn't know about it before I got to that point with the fuselage, and there's no way I'm going back and doing it now. I just don't. I just don't care at this point, because the real point of this project is the aluminum finish and not those kinds of little details. And the truth is, I'm already kind of regretting that I didn't have the time or want to take the time to rivet this whole thing, because it certainly would have made the surface more interesting. But again, trying to stay focused on what this project is really about. So anyway, back to the metallics results. I think you can see that there's some pretty compelling stuff there. I have a lot of things to think about. Nothing here, for the most part, really surprised me, because I've worked with all these metallics and paints like them before enough to know what to expect. But I will say that the AK477 Chrome was definitely a surprise. Whether or not that's going to affect my decision about what to use, remains to be seen. I'm going to give it some time to cure, if it is in fact going to do that, and see what happens to the durability of it. In the meantime, just keep pressing forward with what work I can do. I've got landing gear that need to be built, landing gear doors that need to be painted. They also need this gloss black treatment on the outside. Just little things like that. So I'm going to keep pressing forward and keep keep working on the videos, and if hopefully you guys will find it interesting and informative. Nah. Anyway, enough rambling. Let me just call this one good and sign off. As always, if you guys have watched all of this, I definitely appreciate it. Much love.